Boa noite. Okay. Boa noite. Welcome to VIC Aveiro Art House. This is the first roundtable tonight within the project Break in Case of Emergency. It's a capacity building program for independent labels, label managers and independent musicians. It's confided by European Union through program Music Aire, and it's organized by Navalha Association. We just started, I would say, really 2-week, really intensive program that consists of 4 tracks, different thematics, but composed by masterclasses, practical assignments, roundtables, but also breaks that use for the participant to get to know each other and also territory of Aveiro. But we don't finish the program and project here, because after this 2-week capacity building program and after our team take a little break, we are going to publish a survival kit. Actually, this will be a digital publication that will focus on surviving the emergent digital paradigm within music industry, and it will be free access. I would just mention that we are now in former residence of Vasco Branco's family, so Hugo's grandparents, and we are now in the underground auditorium that actually used to play a role of clandestine cinema during the dictatorship. Today, VIC Aveiro Art House is more than a project, is a family house with a great team and energy that combines creative tourism, culture, arts, and of course we try to keep memory of Vasco Branco and his legacy and culture heritage. I can speak about this heritage for like until tomorrow, but fortunately we close the bar until midnight. So I will give a word to our moderator, Tiago Abelha, to open the first roundtable, technological innovation and disruption of the music industry.
Thank you, Lana. I would like to thank you all and thank for your presence and thank Navalha invitation to be here with this amazing group of speakers, and we plan to speak. The idea is how to answer to the question: how can musicians integrate these technologies like AI, blockchain, and AR, augmented reality, NFTs, within their workflow as a musical professional. So to this roundtable, we will have here on my left side Andrew Dubber from MTF Labs, that most of you had the opportunity to be with him during this day in this masterclass. On my right side, I have Terry Tyldesley from Kitmonsters, and over there we have Miguel Carvalhais from Crónica label and xCoAx conferences co-organizer. I would like first to ask just a short question to each one of you, so people can know a little bit about your work. So Terry, you have this project called the Kitmonsters. You are also an artist. You also give mentorship to different projects. Tell me more about this Kitmonsters website that you run on internet.
Okay, sure. I set it up quite a few years ago to be an inclusive space for people creating in music and tech, especially people underrepresented. So it featured lots of interviews with female producers and engineers, and because I'd also spotted that certain groups of people weren't getting asked about their craft ever, about their instruments or how they created their sounds. So that was the kind of thinking behind it. And then it's moved more and more towards the music and tech space, and I interview people both for the site, and I've got an intermittent podcast about things like their AI projects. And it's fascinating. It gives a really good overview into how people are working with technologies, not just the newest ones, but even some of the oldest ones. Everyone loves to hear a good story about an effects pedal or something. And just to round it off, so I feel I've got a very 360 view of the industry because as well as having had an amazing time working for music, MTF Labs, formerly known as Music Tech Fest, I'm also an artist, producer, performer, so I'm very connected to the grassroots and to what people are kind of thinking and feeling and trying to do in that element. And as this is a EU project, I just want to add, I spent 2 years as a tutor on Jump Music Market Accelerator, which was an amazing program for people who had ideas for new music businesses. I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you. Okay, Miguel, on my right side, he's a teacher on Porto University at Fine Arts Faculty, University. Yeah. He also runs the Crónica label for almost 20 years. He's a sound artist, a designer, and also a co-organizer of the xCoAx conferences about computation, communication, aesthetics, and X.
So thank you, Tiago, and hi everyone. I don't know what else I can say because I think you already said everything, but I think what brings me here tonight is mostly the experience I've been having with a label that we started back in 2003, a very small label, a very niche thing, and I'm even wary about identifying myself as part of the music business. It's more about trying to make a project survive for 20 years without bankrupting us, and still doing stuff that we like. So Crónica is an extremely small artist-run label. I prefer to define it like that nowadays, well, because we're artists and we ran it. So, and because we work with our focus mostly on artists more than any other consideration. So we are mostly a volunteer organization, meaning that the few people that work for Crónica see nothing in return, literally. But we manage to fund projects that we enjoy, and so far we managed to publish 203 releases in several formats, from some digital-only releases to many CDs, many tapes, a handful of vinyls, which is a format I strongly dislike, but we can discuss that later, and even a couple of books, which were mostly really good experiences. And amidst all these, we managed to bring out stuff that I think would not be viable in other labels, because it's extremely niche stuff. And I can talk more about that later if you are interested. All things considered, my main victory with this is that I haven't spent money in the label for 17 years now, and that's really good. I haven't earned any, but that was not the point. Anyway, besides that, I do a couple of other things. I teach at the School of Fine Arts. I'm a designer by training, a communication designer by training, but most of my work for the last, forever, has been with, what people call digital media. Has been with computation in media, computation for creation, computation for artistic creation. So that has led me to work a lot on meta creativity, on strategies for generative art and generative design, and I guess that's another reason why I'm here, I would assume. The conference that Tiago mentioned is something I've been organizing with a group of friends. Well, they're friends at this point. They were colleagues when we started. And it's a conference that is called xCoAx, for Computation, Communication, Aesthetics, and X. And X is what's in the intersection of all of these things. So it's a very interdisciplinary, quite academic, but not fully academic conference that every year brings together a bunch of people that come, many artists, many musicians, several designers, but also a bunch of computer scientists, and sometimes philosophers, and sometimes mathematicians, and a bunch of other people that are interested in what the aesthetic experience of computation is. It's happening this year in Weimar. Last year was in Coimbra. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, Andrew, we had opportunity to spend all day with you, and
opportunity is a kind word.
yeah, it's true. You told us a lot about the MTF labs and how all developed, and so we are here talking about the theme of this talk. It's like technological innovation and disruption in the music industry. You've written several books and articles on music and technological innovation. How would you define technological innovation and disruption in the music industry? And what are some examples of technologies that have been innovative and disrupted in the past or in the present?
That should take us to the end of the session. Terry, can I grab the microphone? I think there's a limited number of them.
Yeah. You give me a good answer when I asked you.
Yeah,
during the dinner.
Okay, so just for background, for those who missed this, MTF Labs is where we bring together really phenomenal artists and scientists, academics and industry. And like Terry said, it used to be called Music Tech Fest. Music Tech Fest is now something that MTF Labs may or may not run as an event, but the labs took over as the main thing. And curating and bringing together around about 50 brilliant people from our community of about 8,000 people worldwide, from innovators from all different sectors, all different backgrounds, from oceanographers to choreographers to cryptographers to dancers, and so you get a whole range of different people from the arts and from the sciences, with no reason other than MTF Labs to ever be in the same room with each other, working together to try and come up with new things. And it's making things together. That's the point of what we do. And that's come out of Music Tech Fest. And we still have music and music technology at the center of it, because everybody likes music and everybody can agree on music. Even if they don't agree on what music, they agree that music is a thing that they like. And it's a great creative springboard into inventing other things. And I think that's where the innovation things comes in. So before I went to the second Music Tech Fest, which is where I came into the story, I was Professor of Music Industry Innovation at a university in the UK. And very much a research-orientated, and particularly a practice-based research-orientated professor. And I found that I could do what I was interested in doing more within the context of MTF than I could ever do within the context of a British university, because it allowed me to make things, to find out things. That's really what it comes down to. So there's a lot. I've read a lot about innovation. I've written a lot about innovation and what it is and what it isn't and what sorts of innovation there are. And there are lots of people who've written some really interesting things about it. And really, there isn't a really good working definition of what innovation is, but it's one of those. It's like pornography, right? You know it when you see it. You might not necessarily have a great definition of it, but you can recognize it. But there's a difference between incremental innovation and radical innovation and disruptive innovation. And that's kind of how I think about it. So incremental innovation is, we're doing this thing, but we want to do it better. What can we make that will make us be able to do that thing better? And then there's what you might call radical innovation or advanced innovation or so on, which is like, we used to do a thing one way, but we can do a technological innovation that changes the way in which we do that thing. And then the disruptive innovation is from the outside. We're going to do the thing that that industry does, but we're not going to include that industry anymore. So the business model is subverted by that. And that's usually what's meant by disruptive innovation. And that's a thing that keeps threatening to happen in the music industry, but doesn't quite a lot of the time. The people with the power quite often continue to have the power. So I'm kind of pessimistic is the wrong word, because I'm an optimistic person, but I don't believe as many things have been disrupted as you might think. I think, Spotify is a really good example of this, and we sort of rag on Spotify a whole lot, but Spotify basically, in order to get all the licenses that Spotify needed, they did deals with the major record labels that gave the record labels shares in Spotify. So, regardless of what record label you are or are not signed to, if you make money on Spotify, you are making money for the major record labels. And that's just the state of affairs, unfortunately. But so what that's done is solidified their position. I don't think Spotify is as disruptive as people think. I think it's a radical innovation over the last however many years it's been going on. I don't think it's necessarily as disruptive. So that's kind of how I think about it as a broad framework. It's more complicated than that, but we have a limited amount of time.
So a question for all of you: how do you see these technologies, these new technologies that we are here discussing? How do you think they will change the music industry in terms of production, distribution, consumption, monetization? What do you think it will be their impact?
I think you can't lump them all in one basket because they will have very different kinds of impacts. In some regards, you could argue that they're making things more accessible to artists. You can get automated mastering for very little money. This AI mastering. Would many artists want that? Well, quite a few would still want the personal touch, me included. I think one of the problems with sort of lumping it all together is there's a kind of whole side of it that gets missed out of the debate, which is all this disruption. It's just forever concentrating more power and more money in big companies. And it used to be big music companies, now it's the big tech companies. And I think a lot of the time we are just looking at the wrong side of it, looking in the wrong places, and we should be getting more creative in our thinking about musicians disrupting right back in a very major way. There's been a start to this for a while. I was chair of Resonate, an ethical music streaming cooperative, which has set out to be the fair pay, fair trade, fair treatment response to Spotify. It's a cooperative. Things grow slowly in cooperative land. And also in the UK, we've had a huge campaign called Broken Record, which has drawn attention to the fact that Spotify has ruined many artists' ecosystems and careers. And this was highlighted even more during the pandemic, because the excuse for why you had to have your music on Spotify if you're more of an independent artist was it's a showcase, it's marvellous, and then you can sell more stuff and do more shows. And then it became very stark in the pandemic that when you can't do the shows and you're not getting more than 20p or 20 cents off Spotify, what are you supposed to do? So I'm not against new tech. I love new tech. I love innovation. But we have to always ask the right questions. There always has to be a sort of critical eye cast on it. If you want to do it in song titles, don't believe the hype. And I'm also very conscious of the idea that there can be an increasing digital divide as things get more complicated, technological. When people are doing AI videos, where does your emerging artist start? Are they getting opportunities at all? So those are the kind of things I'm interested in anyway.
Well, yeah, emerging artists will have to compete with the avatars of ABBA and stuff like that, which may be difficult. But yeah, you were talking about Spotify, and I was trying to remember, because when we started the label, it was, Spotify didn't exist, Napster already existed, file sharing existed, and we looked at that as an opportunity. We looked at file sharing and the budding, digital stores, I can't even remember how they were called, as opportunities for that, for reaching audiences easier, less friction, less expenses, even with some sort of an ecological mirage, like, okay, we can do this digitally without, producing waste, without producing plastic, CDs and other things. And so we started doing digital-only releases, or also doing digital releases fairly early on, and doing incunable, let's call them like that, experiments that didn't work out that well in some cases, and some cases did. And now everything is on Bandcamp, and Bandcamp is a fantastic platform that really gives you, a very nice field to be to complement Spotify or Apple Music or the other streaming services. Because the conclusion we came to is that we cannot afford not to be there. Even if we don't like to be there, if you're not there, you don't exist. Unless, you're very powerful, and then you can afford not to be there. Economically powerful. So we are there in spite of the miserable money we get paid because we don't have shares on Spotify. But what I would like to talk about is not a negative impact that Spotify and other platforms had on us as a label or us as musicians, because you really don't see much return at all from those platforms unless you game them really well, which we don't like doing because that takes a lot of your time. But also on the impact that those systems had on the music culture. Like, they pretty much wiped out music stores, and they pretty much wiped out the culture that developed around music stores. And that was a shame, because I used to spend a lot of time on music stores, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed how music stores and, music press too, but music press existed in a music store, how they contributed for you to actually discover new things, but also to critique new things amongst the community that banded there. And that pretty much disappeared, at least where I come from. And that also led to other impacts, like, for instance, the seeming disappearance of the album format, which, because I'm old, is something I still cherish. And how, and this pressure to continuously churn new stuff, to continuously produce more and more and more, because whatever you released last week is already old and no one is listening to it again. So if you want to keep your streaming meter running, you need to release constantly. And that, I would gather, is not a good thing, all things considered. But that's just my opinion. Yeah.
One more time, remind me, what was the question?
Well, how do you see these technologies changing the music industry in terms of production, distribution, consumption, monetization?
Right, so the composition, production, distribution, marketing, consumption. I'm glad you sort of listed those because music industry singular doesn't exist. These are music industries, and there are lots and lots of them. I think I said this in the session today. It's like the record labels calling themselves the music industry. It's like the lions calling themselves the zoo, because they might be loud and they might have sharp teeth, but they are not the only thing going on. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening within the broader music industries. That said, I think there's a lot going on, and we've mentioned Spotify a few times. I'm really glad that Bandcamp came up because I'm really proud of Bandcamp. I was, for those who missed it, I was on the board of advisors for Bandcamp from day one, and have been with it for the whole journey. And I think what they've done is phenomenal. And I think the idea, the economic idea of it, which I think is quite disruptive in a lot of ways, which is that we make money only when we make more money for artists. And that's not an economic model that pretty much anybody else has at that scale in the music industry. So I think that's really cool and really interesting. I'm the last person to defend Spotify, but on the payouts side of things, I think there is a fair argument to be made that when you have 1 million listeners on Spotify, that's 1 million individual people hearing your song once, which is pretty much exactly the same as your song being played one time in the afternoon on BBC Radio 1. And you get the same money for that. Nobody ever talks about that because it's a really inconvenient truth about Spotify that being played once in the afternoon on Radio 1 is 1 million listens to your song in exactly the same way that 1 million listens to your song on Spotify would be. And the fact that it seems unfair that is the amount of money that you get is because you think of Spotify as being analogous to or a replacement of purchasing records and not analogous to broadcasting, which it's actually more like. I don't think Spotify is a good thing necessarily, but I think we need to actually understand things in the terms of what they are. And I think that there are a lot more things that you can criticize Spotify for, not the least of which is the investment in drones that kill people. That would be one thing that I would have a problem with. But the problem is that in a way it has replaced for a lot of people purchasing music. But here's the flip side. People who subscribe to Spotify pay 120 euros per year for recorded music. Most people paid, on average, before Spotify, 0 euros per year. Like, most people did not spend money on music, on recorded music, at all. Like, I did, you did, but most people did not. Now most people do. And that's really interesting. Again, not defending Spotify, not defending their business model, not thinking that they should pay artists less or the same, but it's really interesting. And when you start to tease out the complexities of it, they're a fantastic strawman villain in these conversations. But yeah, and rightly so. But I think it's really worthwhile to actually consider how those things happen. But they are, for me, they are the distribution part of it. And the technologies that are happening, and I think distribution is kind of one of the least interesting bits. I think the technologies that are happening in the realm of composition, in the realm of production, in the realm of marketing, in the realm of consumption, it's phenomenal. I mean, I don't know what yours. Incidentally, I love vinyl. So if you don't like vinyl and you have vinyl, I'm more than willing to take it off your hands. But I think that reveals that people are different in terms of how they want to listen. I've got a Sonos system at home. I subscribe to a thing called Qobuz, which is like Spotify and Tidal. It's a sort of high-end streaming audio, high resolution, etc. It's a French service, I think. And I'm vaguely reassured by the fact that they pay artists a little bit more than most of the others. And that's part of why I use it. But I listen to records and I have music on pretty much all the time, digital music for listening to. I've got a whole lot of digital files, and I use a service called Rune. Rune Labs is a really great product. Or Rune is the product, Rune Labs is the creator. If you're a music fan and you're interested in how you listen to music digitally, it's a really fantastic interface for that. I really, really love it. And so that, the technology as the consumption end, I think, is really interesting as well. We do end up talking about the distribution and promotion of music far more than we talk about the consumption or the production of music. And consumption is not just listening to music. You have to remember that. It's dancing to music. It's going to gigs together. It's talking about music. It's writing about music. It's all the things around it. I like one of the things I like about records is the sleeves. I love the artwork. I love holding them and reading them and finding out about them. But I also read blogs, and I also so all of that is music consumption. And I think that's a really interesting thing. There's been some fantastic technological developments in that, and I think that's where you start for me, where AI gets interesting because so. Here is another. I feel like I'm the Spotify defender here. Here is a thing I love about Spotify. So, there is his name is escaping me again. There's a guy who do you remember a service called This Is My Jam online? And people would just post their favorite song. This is my jam. This is my jam. This is my jam. And the guy who set that up and ran it. I think he works at somewhere like Skyscanner now, or one of the, flight, or maybe it's sort of one of the hotel rental places or whatever. It's an online service, but for a time he was at Spotify, and he started a thing called Spotify Weekly. And Spotify Weekly was a 30-song playlist that was recommended to you by their algorithm and AI and the rest of it. And it's scary. I listened to some stuff on Spotify. Spotify Weekly was not just recommending things to me that I might like. It was recommending things to me that I own on vinyl and have never played digitally. And it's like, okay, how did you get in my brain? How did you know that was exactly what I wanted? And I think that the AI technologies from music recommendation systems, and I've worked, you remember Sonaris that Michaela set up, and I was working with that, and it was about music information retrieval and that whole sector of technology and AI and thinking about how music makes meaning for people and how music sounds like other music that you might not have thought. Actually, when you think about it, there is some music in some remote regions of the Andes that sound like some music from Ireland, and here are some musical connections. All that I find all that fascinating, and I think that that sort of process of discovery for me is really interesting. I mean, and it costs me a lot of money because I listen to songs on streaming services, and I inevitably end up on Bandcamp buying more vinyl as a result of that. So net positive for music, I guess. That's my take.
Very well. So we were talking about a lot of technologies that for some musicians can be a bit overwhelming. No, it's NFTs, blockchain, AI. It's regarding your own personal experience and the personal projects and the projects you are running. What of these technologies are you using? What's your experience with these technologies?
Go bespoke, darling. I used AI on my album, which is available on vinyl on Bandcamp. I don't know the figures for Europe, but certainly it is widely reported that the biggest growth in vinyl sales is amongst the under 25s. So yes, I used AI. I had a very interesting experiment with AI. There's a wonderful group of technologists in Berlin called Birds on Mars, and they've done some work on AI voice synthesis. And so I sent them half an hour of my voice talking, and it was really freaky because I recited my album lyrics. And it's like when you're singing a song, it's got a whole rhythm, it's got its own thing. And then when you're just saying it, you just think this is just so weird. Anyway, so they trained their AI on my voice and came back with a sort of interface that they have, and I could sort of dial it in and type things in and make it sound really weird, like some wild witches had come down the chimney, or it was speaking in different languages. But after experimenting with the very weird aspects, I decided that what I wanted my AI cat, my stage name's Cat, to do was to be like an oracle, like a predictor of the truth. And so on the album, it's not singing, but the AI is performing a very, very crucial role. And I think the one thing we have to remember on the creator side is as creative people, you need to have a kind of purpose. And there's so much technology going on, you can't just kind of randomly fish around and become an expert in everything. There isn't the time. You know, you have to think what you want to do first, and then experiment with things. But I also am lucky enough to get to beta test things, and I tested a bass player AI from Keku AI Tools, and their concept is they want to have a whole band, and you can feed it some of your track you're working on, and it will create a part. And this was especially fascinating. And I love playing bass, but so I had a go with it, and it actually did come up with some quite good licks. I mean, I wouldn't have used what it spat out, because it was all a bit like plinky plonky. But I thought, well, if I was a bit stuck for ideas, that would be something very useful. And I think it's an example of compositional tools. But in the same way that, you know, perhaps we might have started years ago with like Brian Eno's, you know, Bleak Strategies. You know, AI could be the equivalent. And you were asking earlier about history. There was a very sort of famous time in UK music history. We don't have it anymore, tragically, but we had a very famous program called Top of the Pops. And there was a point when synthesizers came in, and they were banned from Top of the Pops because they were taking work away from musicians. Yeah, it's legendary. And so one can argue that, you know, AI is a sort of banned synthesizer moment, but somewhat bigger. But anyway, that's my creative AI juices flowing for you. Do you want a microphone?
Yeah, please. I didn't know that about Top of the Pops. I do remember when I was a kid watching some of my first performances with synthesizers on Top of the Pops, you know, and those were those were transformative to me, like watching Soft Cell.
Did you notice that the synthesizers weren't plugged in though?
You noticed that.
What I clearly remember is a performance by Soft Cell where they had a reel-to-reel player on the back, and they just played that back, and I thought that was, you know, really ballsy. Now, okay, so where can I get to this? I have zero experience with Web3-ish technologies. With AI, however, I've dabbled. Let's put it like that. So I'm thinking whether I should start from the start or from the end. So maybe I start from the start, because I started using computers to make music, I don't know, mid-90s or something like that. But since about 99 or 2000, I've pretty much only exclusively made music with computers. So from the point where I could get a laptop and bring the laptop on stage with me, that has been my instrument, so to speak. You know, occasionally I use microphones and I record things, but mostly I use the laptop as an all-purpose universal tool. That is also an instrument. And but in doing this, I've also been in a really long-term collaboration with another musician. Well, I collaborate with several musicians, or I have collaborated with a bunch of different people, but I've been working specifically with Pedro Tudela since 23 years now. We kind of have, I don't know, we hesitated calling it a band because it's not a band, it's a project because it sounds fancier. So it's the two of us with two laptops, and in reality is at least 4 entities whenever we perform, because that's how we approach it. So ever since forever now, what we try to do is to use laptops and to use computers not as if they were other humans, of course not, but as if they had, we try to give them some agency in the performance. Because we both come from free improv, so we both enjoy reacting to other musicians and, you know, having to actually improvise when we're on stage. And that is something that we've been trying to do with our machines, you know, using different technologies. We could have, you know, we did over the years many things that now people would hesitate calling AI. They would call them expert systems or something like that. We used Markov chains, stochastic processes, old school stuff. We even used generative adversarial networks for sound when they weren't posh at all and really difficult to implement and sounded pretty bad, but they were interesting to use. These latest things with multimodal large language models, they really sound better, but so far I haven't found them so interesting to use from a creative point of view. Okay, and I find it really important to distinguish here the usage of these technologies, from an aesthetic point of view. So how do you read them, or how do you listen to them as an audience? How do you consume them? And how meaningful they are for that, or they may be for that. And also from a poetic point of view, how interesting are they to use in production? And yeah, large language models are fantastic, say, to give you bass licks, or to substitute musicians, or even to sing and perform. But then, yeah, sometimes that is so good that it becomes very diluted, and then the audience can't really figure out if there's a human or an artificial system there. And well, but that's another issue. So yeah, our practice working with computers has been to try to develop agential systems, to try to develop generative systems that are fun to play with, but that are also fun and interesting to the audience, fun to listen to. Yeah, and just one final note about Spotify and about not Spotify, about these technologies. This is not Spotify's fault, because in a sense it's the fault of how these things, crept into the culture and transformed it. But another of the ill effects that I'm sorry of is the pressure these things put on doing short pieces of music. Partially because of the royalty model, because you are paid per play. So if you compose 60-minute pieces, yeah, you're ruined, right? Because your 60-minute song is getting the same royalties as a 3-minute, very short piece. And yeah, we also tend to do really long pieces, so that's not playing in our favor.
Come in on the short pieces of music thing. So if you go to a conference in the UK that's aiming to educate newer artists, they will tell you're not allowed to have a long intro, and the best thing you can do is chop it off and make it as a separate track. And then, of course, you've got TikTok, which, so if you use Instagram and you connect to music, you can use something from the whole of the track. But with TikTok, you only get a minute. So you have to make sure you've got all your best bits in that first minute, otherwise it's a dud on TikTok. So it's the pressure is on. Shorter. Over to you.
I was just going to ask if that's why you don't like vinyl, because it's actually the 45 RPM record that put the 3-minute 330 physical limit. It was that technology that created the Motown format for recorded music, being the length that it is, being verse, chorus, fade. And yes, there is a royalty model based on that, but it's based on that technology. It's not based on the digital technology.
Yeah. No, my dislike for vinyl mostly stems. Oh well, also because everything is ecological these days. No, it stems from a bunch of places, but it's related with distribution and with how expensive it is. It's related with living in an apartment and having very limited space for stocking our releases, and it's related with also how popular vinyl is, because That seems like a good thing, and it is to a certain extent, but smaller labels have been having a really hard time producing vinyl, because a small label that wants to produce, say, 200 copies of a vinyl needs to wait 7 months until the vinyl is produced.
Until Adele's record has been printed.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because Metallica is doing 10 million vinyls and buying all the factories. So, yeah, that's another problem. But currently we are producing a flexi disc. So,
Very nice.
you know, we are actually doing what will probably be one of the shortest compilations ever, because we're doing a flexi disc with 30 different musicians. And the flexi holds, if you play it at 33 and a third, 5 minutes. So I'm looking forward to hear it. It will probably sound like crap, but that's part of the allure. So, yeah, where was I going?
Oh, because I asked you about vinyl. Okay, so this is another thing that I mentioned today, but the people on the panel haven't heard this, so I'll say it. There is a famous one-panel cartoon where a guy is showing off his record collection, and he says one of the things he loves about it is that not only is it expensive, it's really inconvenient. And I thought, you know what, that describes all of the things that I absolutely love. All the things that we value and treasure. Your children, they take up a lot of space, they're very expensive, and they're really inconvenient, and you absolutely love them to bits. And if they were, you know, tidy and convenient, you wouldn't value them in the same way. And to me, that actually, one of the things I love about records is that it forces me to engage in it in a particular way. I can't just have it on in the background. It's not convenient in any way. I go to I travel to other cities to go to record shops to buy pieces of vinyl, or I wait for them for weeks to arrive and then pay import. It doubles the price coming from Britain. It's ridiculous. But man, I value it. And I have way too much of it. And I would struggle to part with it. So yeah, the technology, if you want to make a really successful technology, make it inconvenient for people, make it expensive for people, and make it just something that have to jump through hoops in order to actually appreciate it, and they'll value it, I think.
Okay, so we are here supposedly discussing a lot of new technologies. I think the word that we hear more is AI. So I think it's this last year it's a buzzword, became a buzzword. So do you think the musicians need to learn these skills, or need to acquire these skills or what skills do they need to apply these technologies, or it is too soon yet to invest time on that? What do you recommend to artists?
Well, I think you have some very pioneering artists who are creating their own AIs, like Holly Herndon's been training hers for ages. But I think we're at the stage now where there's so many AI products around that are just simple to use. I don't think we should expect or can expect artists to learn how to create their own AIs from scratch. And I think it's also very heartening that a lot of the artist pioneers are very passionate about democratizing AI and are sharing their works. Dadabots is sharing folders of loops that he's created for people to use. Holly Herndon, you can use her AI with your track and create something new, and she'll even release, if she likes it, she'll release it and give you a share of the profits. So I think artists should be aware, and I also think it's very important that artists should claim some space for themselves as a sort of group. I know it's easier said than done, but artists need to be part of the debate rather than just being receiving all these things. But I don't think they all need to learn new skills.
I actually think that most artists are already using AI and not thinking about it. And some really simple ways as well. If you're using any, digital audio workstations and you normalize a track, there is some artificial intelligence of some sort going on behind the scenes, where you click that button, it did the thing with the track that you wanted in order to. It's done, right? And I think that as the technology becomes more invisible, it becomes part of your workflow. It becomes more useful, and it's not about, you know, you're not using AI any more than you are using, you know, whatever the technology that email is built on. That you just don't think about it. It's just, it's how the machine functions. And you press that button and you get that result, and away you go. That said, if you want to understand what's going on with AI, oh my God, that's a learning curve. You know, like I did preparation for this, you know, masterclass thing that we did today. And like I had to throw out everything and start again every single day, because just moving so fast in what's possible, what the technology is doing, what the implications of that, what the critiques of that are, and also everybody posting these YouTube videos of, you know, 100 AI tools that you can use to make money doing creative, you know, X, Y, Z every single day. And, you know, it's hard to keep up with it. So if you're inclined to do that, there's so much material for you to dive into. But equally, you could watch videos of people restoring old tea kettles, just as, you know, to just as much effect, and it might actually impact on your music just as well. So I think like one of the things that creative people thrive on is masses of input, and if that's the thing that you want input on, then knock yourself out. But you're going to be using this stuff, I think, for the most part, unless you're, you know, you're making music on a, you know, on a tin ukulele in the middle of a forest, you know, recording to, you know, acetates. There's going to be AI in the mix somewhere, whether you're aware of it or not.
Just on the tools, so I don't think we answered so much about useful tools. I think a lot of the tools around video are really useful because, especially independent artists, all this content you're expected, I hate the word content, but all these outputs you're expected to come up with all the time can be very time consuming. And the fact that you can get help with making lyric videos or spicing up videos you're making, I think in the kind of short term, that's very helpful for independent artists.
Okay, so what do you think? Like, because these models of AI, they are trained with a lot of copyright content. This will raises a lot of ethical and legal and social implications. How do you see it? Because I don't know. It's.
I have specific thoughts on this. Yes, it raises implications, but almost everybody's thinking about it wrong. For their own benefit, right? For reasons, you know, of self-interest. Totally understandable. I think that if you take it as read that AI systems learn, right? That's the fundamental mechanism of an AI system. And that is the same thing that a musician does by listening to lots of music, by reading lots of books, by taking in all this content. If you are replicating the things that you listened to or read or watched, then that is copyright infringement. If you are listening to and being inspired by, and like the, what's his name? Red-headed singer, Ed Sheeran. Ed Sheeran, court case, Marvin Gaye. Yes, of course he's listened to Marvin Gaye. Did he make a Marvin Gaye song? No, he did not. That is not copyright infringement. That's not how copyright works. If you want to rewrite the rules of copyright, then knock yourself out. But currently, there was no infringement there. Ed Sheeran is an AI in this story. Ed Sheeran has, you know, so basically, if you think about like content again, but if the AI systems have gone through and all the scrapable content, all the Marvin Gayes of the world and the you know Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the you know and Prodigy and anybody else that an AI can listen to and make something that has clearly heard those things but is not those things, that is not copyright infringement. There are no ethical implications in that. at all. You could introduce some, you can problematize that, and you can say that these artists, their work is being used to generate something, but their work is being used to generate something that you make. Everything that you have heard has gone into the music that you are making. And yes, there's a lot of work that you're building on top of. You are standing on the shoulders of giants, but you are not ripping them off. You are contributing to the artistic pool of works. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, and I know that somebody will come back on that, but I just wrote a blog post about this, and so it's fresh in my mind. So.
I think one of the problems is, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give you any legal speak, but I'm a member of the Ivers Academy, which is the songwriting academy in the UK, and went to a very interesting session with some top lawyers on generative AI. And one of the things that was very clear is that the law on what is copyrightable, what is a sort of AI, what an AI makes, is very different, even between European countries that are still members of the EU. And so that makes things very complicated. But I think you were talking about perhaps about this implying what about the social consequences. I think we all know that AI is machine learning. It's only as good as the data sets it's fed. There are huge problems with that in terms of kind of bias, in terms of issues of black faces not being represented, and I've got lots to say to that in my masterclass tomorrow, so do come along and be entertained. But there's there's so many different elements to this. We could probably do a whole week on it very happily. But there we go. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to leave a note because I understand your point of view, and I even agree with your point of view to a certain extent. I am wary, however, about how, well, there are two things here. One is how you train these large language models and how you feed them, everything in the kitchen thing. Mm-hmm. And how very often you can't at all, because you feed them way too much information. You can't organize that information suitably. And then you get, the biases that you were talking about, because you have things that are underrepresented on that corpus, and you have things that are way overrepresented, and then things lean certain ways, and then, a very good example is, and then your LLM is generating images with watermarks because it has digested so many images from, photo banks. Another thing is how then the system after train can actually be used to copy people and to copy, to do style transfer. And then you can request, do me something in the style of. And then you actually get really good, well, can we call them forgeries? Technically they're not, but you have really good appropriations of style, and those can be problematic.
Problematic, perhaps, but they're not.
Depending on how you use them.
No. Okay, so there's a really interesting thing here, which is in the style of, or in the voice of, and how ownable those things are, and how those things relate to copyright. The argument is not whether those things are in copyright or not, because they aren't. Even those things that you're seeing that are AI-generated images that appear to have watermarks in them, that are jumbled, but those are original creations. They might not be artistically brilliant, they might not be created by a human being, they might be clearly drawn from a whole lot of other things that have been seen, but they do not include them, and they do not copy them, and they do not pass themselves off as them.
There have been studies that actually prove to a fair degree of certainty that the approximations are very, very real in some cases. They deviate from whatever was copied, but especially with image generation, sometimes the similarities are eerie, like really eerie. meaning you can find within the corpus that was used to train the GAN, you can find the exact thing that the GAN is outputting. That happens quite a lot.
Yeah, if you can find a replication, if you can find the image that was trained on, then absolutely you've got a copyright case.
The problem is that if you train your corpus with 1 billion images, then how can you even understand that? You can't, manually check, and the system cannot manually check. So that is a potential problem. But having said that, the phase space of those systems is so vast that the probabilities of that happening are really low. They may happen, or that may happen, but the probability is really low because, it's...
You might accidentally write Blue Monday, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but you may do it without AI anyway, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that is always an interesting thing. But another thing that is interesting, and I thought about that when you were talking about AI's learning, is how it's a problem with how we discuss these things, and how their creators discuss them, because that's what originated it all, because the idea of learning the idea of calling learning what an AI system does is risky, because it overly anthropomorphizes the system. An AI system does not learn. An AI system optimizes. It's a very different thing. An AI system doesn't, it's creative, but it doesn't create in the same way as we do, because it doesn't have a model of the world in the same way that we do. It understands, and I'm anthropomorphizing again with this word, but it devises some things about the information it's fed to it, and then it deduces some things that may connect to your models of the world. But AIs are profoundly alien things, and it's part of the interest of working with them is to understand how alien they are. And for instance, you were talking about watermarks. One of my favorite things with LLMs and with LLMs that generate images is that they still cannot generate text. They generate really creepy text.
Yeah.
Like if you were in a dream. You never get a word. You get these really odd things that look like text but are totally out there. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. The most recent thing I asked a text generative image program to do was to create a typography that was the alphabet made out of insects, right? Has a really strange understanding of what the alphabet is.
Yeah.
Insects, no problem. Alphabet, not so much.
Yeah, I saw someone describing that way of creating text as what text is in a dream, actually, because when you read in a dream, you can't, words are very fluid. I mean, I don't remember having read in a dream, but the image I have from seeing text in dreams is something that's always moving around. Yeah. It's really nice. And I think that's the really interesting thing about LLMs is how they diverge from us. Because using large language models to create hyper-realistic or photorealistic things, or, baselines that sound like baselines, or voices that sound exactly like Holly Herndon or exactly like someone else, technically it's interesting. Artistically, I don't know, or I think they can be far more interesting than that. That of course allows it to do fantastic things, but it also allows it to keep ABBA alive forever, and I don't know.
See, I think Terry has exactly the right approach to this, which is how can I use this in a creative way? Not what is this doing to me, not what is the effect of AI on me. It's like, what can this thing do? What are the edges of it? How can I use this in my record? I think that's really cool, and I think that's a really healthy response to any new technology. It's like, let's take it apart. Let's see what else it can do. Let's see what it can be used for that it wasn't designed for. And I think that's an artistic response to a technology. Yeah. Terry, can you... I'm taking over as moderator here. But I really want Terry to talk more about how she used AI in the record, because I think that's a really interesting thing.
I guess I did. Well, it was a process. In this, you're talking about your laptop being an instrument. Also, for us, the studio was also an instrument. So we were still, we were sort of still finishing some of the songs and writing new ones, and but it just kind of just like grew into a character, and it was the Oracle, and it's there, I don't know what more I can say really, but I do think the point about kicking new technologies around a bit and seeing what happens and bashing things together is I think it's something I think it's an ethos I've got from Music Tech Fest and MTF Labs actually.
I think you might have brought it with you.
No. I think it's happy hacking. has definitely had a big influence on my work.
It's one of the memorable moments early on in MTF was Terry on stage with
3D printer.
Yeah, 3D printer was playing the drums, and Lou Edmonds from Public Image was playing some sort of hacked guitar creation, and there were 3 hackers playing instruments they'd made out of Wiimotes, and nobody had prepared anything, and it could have been a cacophony, but it wasn't. It was this sort of joyous piece of improvised music. It wasn't even free music, improv. There was structure to it. There was musicality to it. There were musicians making music on the stage as if this was a normal thing. But like you were playing was it there or was it in Paris? You were playing a Broken Speak and Spell.
Yeah, it was there. No, I think I tried to play it there, but it actually worked in Paris.
Right. Okay. But it was like, this, because the only thing that you make music out of is technology, and that's true of everybody, right? There isn't like music is technological. The voice is a technology. I'm sorry, it is. And everything is an extension of, we can argue that as technology being natural or not natural or whatever. But I think that a technology, if you think of it as a tool that enables you to express something, then voice is very much a technology that we can apply to the creation of music. And you can do really interesting things with it. We were talking today about beatboxing being this emulation of artificially generated, drum machine sounds, using the most natural of technologies in music creation, which is the voice. But so all of it is, what can I do with technology? What do I want to express with this technology? And here are some new technologies. Great, let's add them to the pile of technologies that we can use to make music with. I think to me, that seems like a healthy approach.
Oh, definitely. Very well. So some tips here for our public, our musicians. How do you keep up with the latest developments and trends in these technologies? Are there some platforms or that you can recommend?
Well, one answer is okay. So any speaker on technology, any kind of technology, but especially music technology, they're all going, oh God, I've got to redo my presentation again because there's been another 5 announcements today about new things going on. So the answer is nobody can keep up with it all. Even the people who are experts in it can't keep up with it all. So I think have a few trusted friends. There are some wonderful journalists and analysts, and Sherry Hu with her Water and Music newsletter. And there's also a subscription service, so you can go deeper. So I think do what you can, but it's whatever you can is enough. I don't think people should feel under pressure because we're at, during extraordinary times. So I started doing my work on my presentation, masterclass for tomorrow, and then suddenly, oh, we've got Google's thing, and so oh fuck, I have to get on the wait list, and I have to see if I can get through the wait list so I can experiment with it in time. So I have got some strange noises to play. And it was very clever because it got you to vote. So it would create 2 things, and you had to say which one you preferred. So it was already making you you know.
Train it, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what I've got to say.
Good.
Oh.
I have mine. Thanks. No, the thing you said about redoing presentations. Yeah, if you teach, you also run into that problem. And so many times I wished I taught, I don't know, medieval art history, because then I would need to prepare my slide deck once, and that's it. But no, you really need to revise it every year, and sometimes you need to revise it halfway through the semester, because, you know, the lecture where you're talking about AI is in week 10, and then it's outdated by week 2. So how do I keep in touch? How do I keep updated? You know, having students helps a lot. Because, and especially having students that are doing research, practice-based research helps a lot. But yeah, then you have all the other sources. But then what I've been finding out is that it's also good not to be too updated, or not to be too focused on constantly updating yourself, because if you do that, then you risk becoming too technologically focused, you know, and then you become one of those. Well, I teach at the Fine Arts School, and in my university, the Fine Arts School is detached from the engineering school. It's not, for those of you that are in Aveiro, everything here is in one campus. In my university, things are spread all over town. So we do get to meet the engineers very often, but luckily we work in different buildings. We work in different parts of the city, which is also nice. But we do feel, because we have a lot of shared programs and whatnot, we do feel this tension. Engineers are really focused on the technology, and they don't care about the rest. You use that technology once, it's done. It's, you know, it's in the garbage dump because you already used it. And what you do as an artist is the opposite of that. It's kicking around the technology, as you were saying. It's trying to figure out what in it resonates with us as humans, and not just, you know, the shiny new thing that comes out. Sometimes it's the opposite of the shiny new thing. It's the thing that really makes you look at the technology in a different way, that makes you wonder what the fuck even that thing is. You know, that's what then makes it worthwhile from an artistic point of view, and makes it really, you know, sometimes it's being given the instrument and asking, how do you play this thing in order to learn what you shouldn't do with it? You know, in order to learn what you should avoid doing with it, and going around it in different ways and trying to, you know, reinvent it or rediscover it. So, yeah, it's important to be aware of what is going on, but also important not to be overly aware and always, you know, always buying the shiny new toy and getting your software updated every time you can, because, you know, sometimes it's good to use 10-year-old software.
I'm going to say exactly the same thing in a slightly different way. In that, I think it's almost always a good idea to use dated software. I think the thing about how do you stay on top of it, you can't. It's nice to try, but don't make it your whole thing, unless that's how you want to, you know, unless that's your identity and that's, you know, you're on top of it guy or whatever. But curiosity is a wonderful thing. If this is something that you're interested in, absolutely, there's so many resources for this. Seek out critical voices, and like intelligent critical voices that put these things into sociological perspectives and political perspectives, and have a kind of a long view of the economic perspective of these things. I think that's really interesting, rather than what's the latest Google announcement, what's the latest, you know, OpenAI announcement, you know, oh my God, this is everything's changed, the whole world is different. It's look out the window, it's not that different. But also use technologies that work for what you want to do. And so I use an RSS feed reader. I don't know if anybody else here still, so I still use an RSS feed reader to get information about the world. I think it's an incredibly useful tool. If you don't know it, it's like getting email from blogs who have updated their most recent, I thought 12 years ago it was going to be the biggest thing. It's how podcasts work. It's a delivery mechanism that just gives you the most recent thing as it's published by these things. And you can just scan through them and go, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting. Now, it's a really good way of keeping up to date with what's going on. But B, it's a really old technology that I find really useful. And so I use it. And I use other technologies that are really old. There's a note-taking piece of software called Workflowy, which is basically bullet pointing. It's a small piece of tech. It's a clever piece of tech. It's basically been unchanged for the last 15 years. It's still supported, but it's not that different than it was when it started. And I use it all the time because it's useful all the time. I've also introduced some AI technologies to my workflow. Mostly those that are integrated in other things that I already use, like in Premiere Pro or in whatever. There are AI tools built into some of these things. I use Notion all the time for most things, and now Notion has AI integrated, and I'm starting to use bits and pieces of it. It's not an on-off switch. It's not I have to know everything or I want to shut the whole world out. It's be curious and find things that are useful to you. But, you've got other things to think about, probably.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also find RSS a very good old technology to keep up with the latest with news of different blogs. One thing that worries me about this new technology is we are speaking, it's the blockchain, huge consumption of energy. AI, huge consumption of energy to train the models. Okay, you need to train it once, but we will not stop training more and more models and more complex models. Are these technologies sustainable? Should we stop to use them, or how should we approach them in nowadays that we have the huge ecological problems going on?
I don't think I'm the right person to ask for that. I flew here. Seriously, I think it's at that level. It's like, I think it would be hypocritical for someone like me who will take 3 flights in a train to sit in front of, let's face it, 10 people, when I could have done a Zoom call. And there are lots of reasons that I think this is a valuable thing to do. And you make these, I don't want to excuse ecological devastation, but I got to be honest, I'm contributing to it. And so I think, yes, we need to think about those things. We need to be honest about those things. I think there are lots of really important changes that have happened in the world of, let's not say blockchain, let's say distributed ledger technologies. That there are a lot of DLTs that are not ecologically catastrophic. I gave an example today of Bloxburg, which is a way of registering your scientific research on a distributed ledger that doesn't use proof of work, which is the thing that uses all of the energy. It uses proof of authority, which they have 50 nodes, which are MIT, University of Oxford, NYU. If 40 of those 50 say, yeah, this is real, you're going to take their word for it. You don't need everybody on the whole system to do what essentially amounts to difficult puzzles in order to churn through a lot of data in order to verify something. You just don't. So they found a way of using a distributed ledger technology that doesn't use that. There are all sorts of other examples of that. There's the Tangle, which is another thing that, what's it called? IOTA, which is a cryptocurrency it uses. And that, again, it doesn't use no energy because there are computers plugged into the grid, but it uses significant, like by a factor of several zeros, less electricity than say the first incarnation of Ethereum. Ethereum has improved radically as well. So people are finding ways to do this better, and I think just we have to be mindful of the fact that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see that the debate has changed, because a lot of new platforms and some of the older ones are very, very keen to let people know that they're super eco-friendly. Whether they actually are is a bit hard to really judge, but I think the message has hit home that people won't tolerate past practices for much longer.
I can pitch in. Of course, I'm not an expert on the. I'm not an expert on the energy consumption of the systems or on the pollution that is created by those systems. But I think that you don't need to be one these days, and actually you always need to be aware of that, whatever the media you're using and whatever the tools you use to do your work, whatever your work is. It's impossible not, or it's unethical not to worry about that these days. And I didn't fly here because I took a train, because I live nearby, but I also fly around, but still, I would be very wary of using, say, Ethereum, or to use blockchain technology or ledger technology with proof of work, because I find them, extremely problematic. However, there are inevitably alternatives are going to be developed that will address some of those issues, and I think you really need to, to factor that in with all the multiple variables that any project has. It's something you need to worry about. 10 or 20 years ago, it's something you wouldn't, it wouldn't cross your mind, but now I think it's the ethical thing to do is to also consider that a central part of your project, always. And a central part of your decisions. It's like not necessarily doing carbon offsets or not necessarily gauging how much carbon you're producing, but you need to worry about it to a certain extent. Yeah, and you don't always have the right tools to do that, by the way.
And I think, like Terry says, I think these things are improving, but there are other reasons not to use like Ethereum or Bitcoin, or that they are speculative by design, that they are multi-level marketing schemes, they are predominantly scams. These are perfectly good reasons not to use them, but absolutely don't use blockchain technologies because of the ecological impact. But get rid of your car while you're at it. There are big problems in the world, and this is part of that. But it's an easy scapegoat, I think, just because it's new and it's scary, and people want to go, there are terrible things about it, while they're doing terrible things, and they're using clothes dryers, or they're
It may be good to have an easy scapegoat like that, because then that can be a good gateway for you to start developing a sort of an ecological thinking, and then looking at your clothes dryers, and then
sure, but most people aren't using it, so most people don't have any inconvenience in stopping using it. And I think that we've solved it because we got rid of all the Bitcoin people.
Sure, but I don't know. I hope that artists can contribute to that discussion.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that artists can do best, is be the canary in the coal mine, the early warning system, the alarm bells in society. I think people should listen to what you say and pay attention to it, because that's what you're for.
Okay, I don't know if in the public anyone has any question that wants to make to our speakers.
Well, I can say we have some questions in the chat. Maybe I can
Okay.
read. Wait.
I don't know how far that will stretch.
Okay, so we have two questions. Okay, so hello. Are NFTs just a hype or just a bubble? Or is it useful nowadays for independent digital artists? Should we disbelieve crypto
actives, since it doesn't seem to be as democratic as it was supposed to? That's one of the questions.
Okay, can I answer that? Yes.
Yes, to which bit?
Okay, so there is a fantastic video, a documentary online, Canadian documentary called Line Goes Up. Google Line Goes Up documentary. Spend the next 2 hours and 20 minutes watching that. That is the best answer to your question. And it's far more in-depth than I could possibly be. And I suspect if you do that, you're probably not going to create NFTs. I think there's more to it than that. I also think that there are... The problem with NFTs is not the artists making NFTs and making money with NFTs. I am in favor of anything that makes creative practice sustainable for independent artists. But it is, we talked about Spotify before. Spotify are angels compared to the kind of people who are driving the whole NFT space. And I think that documentary will come out of that. So yeah, the democracy aspect of it is fraudulent. However, I know some very good artists who have made some very nice things, who have sold them as NFTs. They have made some money, and I am absolutely delighted for them. But do watch Line Goes Up, because it's important.
I'm broadly in agreement with that. Yes, there's a lot of bubbles. There's a lot of, some people would say a lot of money laundering, but there's all kinds of shenanigans associated with NFTs. But independent artists are making some money, and for some people it's a very direct fan connection, and they get a royalty each time an NFT is sold on. But I think also there is a lot of NFTs never sell. I mean, we only hear about the wildly successful ones, and so there's has been some discussion recently that the average NFT is going to end up a similar price to a vinyl record, your favourite thing. So yeah, yes and no and no and yes. There we go.
Thank you. I think the discourse around NFTs definitely has some selection bias, because you only hear about the successful people that made, and the early discourse about blockchain and cryptocurrency also suffered from that. You heard about the people that made money, you didn't hear about the people that made zero money and the people that were exploited because, someone drew the apes. Who drew the apes? No one knows who drew the apes. Some freelancer that was paid peanuts for drawing the apes. I had students that drew NFTs for third parties, and they were paid peanuts because, it was a job. So although I know a few of those success stories, and some of them are from artists I truly like, really interesting art that they have been producing, I'm still really to find an interesting NFT project, a project that uses NFT in a way that is interesting artistically speaking, not economically speaking. I imagine, I know it's possible for that to happen, but I still haven't discovered it. So that's the best I can say. Most of what I've seen are really problematic ways of using the medium. Using the medium of NFTs and distributed ledgers to create artificial scarcity, to inflate prices, to speculate. And obviously I can't condone that. That's what I can say.
There was any other question from our...
Thank you. Okay, so the second question. Well, Carlos says thank you for answering the question. So, Hi, question to any of you. How do you see the rising of prompt masters who dominate the inputs of AI generators, get loads of audience and get accepted as artists, but no artistic or technical skills?
Go for it. Yeah. I have something to say on this though.
Okay, the two things I can say is that I can make an analogy with, say, 150 years ago, whenever, you would be asking, what do you say about those people that, just put emulsion on a piece of paper and use this contraption that, is a photo camera, push a button and do images without learning how to draw. Prompt engineering, as people call it, is programming. It's programming in a really different way, but it is programming. And as such, it's not new. It's just a new programming language. So I think it's interesting in that sense. And I think, by the way, that whenever you see images that were generated by images or any other modality of output that is generated by those systems, most of the times they only become interesting when they are confronted with a prompt. They only become interesting when you see the prompt that created the image or the sound or whatever. Or at least that's when they become really interesting, because of course the images can be interesting on their own. And I think it's in this dialectical relationship that that the system really thrives, is how did the machine react to this? And how was the machine thinking to come to this from there? And how was the human, or whoever was prompting it, because it could have been a machine, thinking and engaging in that dialogue with the system? So, yeah.
I've just got a very quick one. It is now a real job. There are prompt engineer meetups in London where people can discuss their professional skills. So, yeah, that's kind of just a state of play report.
I agree that it's programming, but I think it's misnamed. I think instead of prompt engineering, what it is actually, when you look at it, it's prompt creative writing. And that puts a different spin on it. But the other thing, you mentioned it as programming, and we say, is this an art or is it just engineering? But there's stuff in between those things. So you think of something else that is very much programming, and that's knitting patterns. And there is craft. If you look at, a knitting pattern is software. It's a program for the creation of, a textile. And there are people who design patterns who are essentially programmers, but they have a different programming language that generates a knitting pattern. And that allows people at home to make their own sweaters or socks or woolly hats or whatever it might be. But there is an element in the middle, I think, of those things which comes under craft. And I think that's a really interesting expression of human creativity that is undervalued, and I think that yes, you can get a job in it, the prompt engineering, but I think engineering hides the fact that there is this sort of creative, technical approach to what it involves. That said, a lot of the discourse around online at the moment is prompts are a thing that we need to go through to get beyond. Prompts aren't always going to be here. We're not always going to need these things. The AIs are going to be able to get us without somebody who says, how can I trick this AI into giving me the thing that I want by explaining it in all these different ways? It's like early SEO. We have to describe things in about 19 million different ways in order to understand that what I mean is razor, sharp thing, cutter, beard scraper, et cetera, et cetera. And we go beyond that stage. And I think, yes, it's a job you can currently get. I don't think it's going to be for a long time. But then I would have said that about social media manager 10 years ago, and that's still a thing, so what do I know?
Now a social media manager does prompts to train the AI.
Exactly, yeah.
So we are getting to the end of our roundtable. I don't know if any of you would like to add anything, any remark, or maybe any other question from our public.
I think this last question brought me back to the copyright thing you were talking about, because when you talked about the Ed Sheeran court thing happening, I totally agreed with you. I think it would be ridiculous for him to lose that. Then when Miguel answered, I was totally agreeing with him. and that means, for example, that Ed Sheeran court case. He won because he couldn't prove that he was ripping off that song. But there was another case a few years ago. I think what's the name of it? Doritos, the snacks. They asked Tom Waits for a song, and of course, Tom Waits. He said no, and so they went on and made a song that sounded like him. Yeah, and he sued them, of course, and he won because there was a proof that they talked to him before, so that was really easy to sort out. And with AI, I think it's easy to go to the code and find out if someone put on the code, at least an expert, if there was an intent to sound to the plagiarism or not. I don't know if that's easy or not, but I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. I think it's over there. Again, we need to separate copyright infringement from plagiarism, from passing off, from getting somebody to be the spokesperson for your brand without their permission. So the Tom Waits thing wasn't about copyright at any point. There was no copying. In terms of, because copyright is not about the voice, it's about the work. It's about the song, it's the composition, it's about, I have made this thing. If you replicate that thing, then fine. They spoke to Tom Waits. Tom Waits says, no, I do not want to represent you. And so they got somebody essentially to pretend to be Tom Waits and pass off, and that's the legal phrase, is passing off, as if it was Tom Waits. They pretended that they did have Tom Waits. And that's where they got them on that. It wasn't about, well, it sounded like Tom Waits, therefore it's copyright infringement, because it just wasn't. What he got them on is they were pretending that I endorsed them by singing a song for them, and I don't endorse them. And that person who they pretended was me was not me. And I think that it's really like Terry said, I'm not a lawyer, and nor do I play one on television, but. I'm familiar enough with this, and because I've had to teach it at university, to know that there is so much confusion around this stuff. But actually, a lot of it is very, very clear. And the one thing that is clear about copyright is that it's, the phrase is it subsists within the work. You don't have to copyright a piece of music. Copyright exists because the piece of music exists. You can do things that can register that copyright to record that it exists, but it exists regardless of what you do. If you create a work, that work has copyright, and that has nothing to do with the timbre of your voice. That might change with AI. People might decide we need new laws to do that, but currently, as far as I'm aware, nowhere on earth is that the law.
We talked this afternoon about fairness and justice in the music industries, and how subjective that is, depend on which part is speaking. How do you personally, how do you envision more fair or more just way of distributing or selling or consuming music. Do you have any ideas about this?
But I'll let somebody else talk first.
In the UK, there are an increasing number of cooperative businesses in music, whether that's running venues or a new music label has been created. And I think it's a great structure, the cooperative structure, and there are different forms within it to hardwire in values and fairness into whichever business you're using. And I think definitely we will be seeing more of this, where people wanting fairness in music, whatever arm of music it is, make use of tried and tested organisational structures. And I know that certainly in the UK, Cooperatives UK is very keen to to take more of a lead in the industry.
Okay, I'm going to do. I've been doing this one for about. Does anybody know Will Page? Do you know Will? Will used to be the chief economist for PRS, and then he became chief economist for Spotify, and then he became somebody who wrote books about economics, and particularly as it relates to the music industries. And he was one of the main champions early on of Spotify as being a solution to piracy, in inverted commas. It's a way of extracting money from people by them listening to music for free. And for him, that seemed like a real solution. We had lots of very long conversations about that. But one of the things that we most disagreed with or about was this idea of fairness and how you make things fair. And because he was working for the PRS, which is the Songwriters Collection Society, they've taken all the money from all the broadcasters and all the places that play music, and they would distribute it to the songwriters and the performers. And his quest for fairness, which came from a really good place, I think, was about accuracy. Right? The problem that we have is we don't have accurate enough information to make sure that the people who don't get played on the big radio stations when we're paying attention, so they might not get their money, so that will go in Elton John's money truck that gets delivered every week instead, and that isn't fair. And so what we need is more accurate systems. And my argument was accuracy is not your problem. If you want to be fair, you take 20% of the money that comes into PRS and you give it to the bottom 80% of artists, right? So his claim was always that PRS was effectively a socialist organisation, which is what
I'm a member of PRS.
That's the noise I made as well. But his argument was kind of an interesting one, which was that it's owned by the members. All the money that comes in is distributed to the members minus the administration fee. So it could not be more socialist than that. I said, you could try. And here's one way, is you take 20% of all the money that comes in and you give them to the bottom earning 80% of artists, because accuracy is not what makes things more fair. Giving people more opportunity makes things more fair. If you've got the people who are earning the least suddenly get enough to fix their van so they can tour, or to buy a new guitar amp, or to, have the key replaced on their keyboard or drum machine or those sorts of things, you get to not just benefit those artists, you benefit music. You make music better for everybody. To me, that's an intervention that if you looked at it from a purely economic perspective, you go, well, that's not fair. Those people didn't earn that money. I don't care. That's not how I define fair, which is why those things became problematic, because I'm more socialist than Will Page thinks the PRS is.
I totally agree with the redistribution element, and I think also there's an organisation called Music Venue Trust in the UK, and they're trying to get the sort of bigger industry players for there to be some kind of levy on concert tickets in arenas that gets redistributed to grassroots level music, which is much worse supported in the UK than in a lot of European countries like yours. So a little aside on PRS, I'm a member of PRS and PPL, two music organisations in the UK. One of them I get a vote and the other I don't. and only the kind of top artists get a vote. So I don't call that very democratic. But anyway.
He didn't
That's a bit kind of insidery.
He did not, to be fair, Will Page never claimed that it was democratic.
Yes, sorry. Let's not end on a sort of like minuscule point. I think.
But no, I think
it's been a brilliant discussion.
Bring it around back to fairness again, and what that came up. We had. You'll remember because you were there, although you were very busy at the time. In 2016, at MTF in Berlin, we had the blockchain lab, and we had rights organizations and musicians and composers and publishers and cryptographers, computer scientists, all in the room together to go, how do we make blockchain make music fair? And they spent 5 days debating what fair means. And how can I make this more unfair in my favor, which is really what it came down to. And so what's fair to a publisher is not necessarily fair to an artist, is not necessarily fair to a rights organization, is not necessarily fair to a computer programmer. And so once again, and this I guess is my big takeaway, hopefully, that you've got from the whole day of masterclasses today, is people are the problem. The technologies... Capitalism is a byproduct of people. So I think like what it comes down to is you don't have a technology problem, you have a people problem. You have that with the way that blockchain is organized to be ecologically catastrophic. You've got it in the way that NFTs are exploitative and corrupt and speculative. You've got it in the way that money is distributed from Spotify. All of those things are people problems. And technologies are how people put themselves out into the world, how they communicate with the world, how they extend themselves. And those are the things that we need to sort of isolate and the problems that we need to solve. Because if we keep trying to fix the technologies, we're going to keep getting those sorts of technologies because we haven't fixed the people.
Anyone for the last question? So we are finishing the first round table. You have okay. We are finishing now the first round table of the break in case of emergency. The bar will still open for around half an hour, so I invite you all to discuss a little bit more these topics if you want. And I would like to thank you all for your presence and see you tomorrow on the continuation of the break.
Masterclass.
Yeah.
Terry Masterclass.
Yeah, thank you. And
Do you remember the last time we were on a panel session together? I think it was 2013.
Oh, was it the bloggers thing?
The Google thing in the pub in London,
Yes,
before my
yes.
first MTF. Do you remember what happened to the third speaker?
Who was the third? And I can't remember.
It was a guy from Google.
Yeah.
He was kind of Captain Music from Google. He died in a horrible car accident about a month later.
No,
Yes.
no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that doesn't...
Awful.
No.